This is a partnership. Thank you to School District 61, that's Greater Victoria, for launching this 4 years ago, this incredible series. We're also in partnership with the Rural Education Advisory and in partnership with Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center. And I'm delighted to be presenting / facilitating with my amazing colleagues, Janice Mose and Melissa Burdock. Hey, colleagues up in the corner box there. Here we go. I'm going to do a little territory acknowledgement, and I'm going to pass to Tammy to do some welcoming as well. I'm joining you from Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam territory. I'm literally on Musqueam territory here today in my office where my plants are dying, but the plants look gorgeous outside. And I am so grateful to be here on this land in the territory. And I had the opportunity to go and thank the water this morning and be connected to this place. And learning in partnership with elders and knowledge keepers here at UBC has been transformative for me over the last 5 years since I've moved to my role here. And teaching and learning happens in partnership with the land, but also with the nation that's here. And so I'm just grateful to be here and to be, I guess, a baby learner, if you will, coming to understand things I didn't realize I didn't know. I'm going to pass the torch to our co-host, Tammy Renyard.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're super excited to have you here with us. Like Leighton said, this is year 4. I can't even believe that we're at year 4. We're super grateful to be able to have a conversation across the province with folks who are new to the profession and folks who have been in the profession for longer. I'd like to acknowledge that Greater Victoria School District is on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, the Lekwungen speaking people, and new information that we've learned working with Butch Stick, one of our elders, is that this was a territory where other nations would come to smoke herring, harvest and smoke herring, and Lekwungen is the language of the Lekwungen people. And so super grateful to live and learn. And like Leighton said, I feel like I'm on a journey as well, and grateful for the folks around me who gently guide and support the learning, and I'm proud to be actively in the work trying to know better, do better as well. So grateful that you're here today and looking forward to seeing you throughout the year if you're able to come with to our other sessions. So I'm going to turn it back to Leighton.
As you're able, we invite you to locate yourself on the Indigenous territory you're joining us from. And if you could make a personal connection, that helps us be in relationship and engage in a decolonizing practice. So if you have a moment and your fingers are warmed up, we invite you to locate yourself in the chat box on the Indigenous territory that you're joining us from, and any personal connection you can make to the territory, the place, or the peoples. And as you're doing that beautiful contribution, I am just going to share with you our questions for this series. So it's a 3-part series this year. Unless we get so excited we add a 4th one again, we can't seem to stop ourselves sometimes. But our overarching questions are, how can we welcome the diverse funds of knowledge that middle year students have to deepen and personalize their learning? And how can we engage middle years learners with pedagogies that are student-centered, identity affirming, and diversity positive? We have a student voice theme this year, everyone. And in all 3 sessions, we're specifically going to attend to literacy and numeracy as part of that work. Just to begin, as it's our launching session for the year, just want to kind of locate ourselves in the realization that just as we talked about unlearning or decolonizing our practice in relationship to our territory and our nations, we have a lot of unlearning to do just in our overall system and the colonial nature of our system. Many of us were taught, educated, you might even use the word trained, in a system that was very transmission oriented, that really didn't value what we brought, but suggested this is the knowledge that you must have and this is the way that you need to be. Someone like myself who's been teaching in the province for 30 years now, Tammy, I think it's our 30th anniversary as teachers in the province. We really moved over the last 30 years to something that we call generative or like thinking classrooms, this idea where we want students to be making decisions and thinking and trying things out. And that's been exciting, but we're still stuck in a system that really values transformation, even as we try to move towards this generative or constructivist approach. But today we also want to anchor ourselves in what we would describe as a transformative approach to teaching, one that brings in our whole selves, that's holistic, that comes to understand that our emotions and our spirits and our places and the ways that we are and who we are all connected together. And so we're engaging in transformative pedagogy, which right away values every child for everything that they bring and takes a stance that we're helping students grow themselves even deeper into who they are. We're not here to change kids. We're here to celebrate them and nurture them. And we can do that better in community that values diversity and that everyone's bringing something to the space that others can't, because we're all unique. We have a big idea, friends, colleagues. You ready for it, Taya? Frolics, which is we're fostering self-advocacy in kids. We want them to develop the capacity to speak on their own behalf and represent their own needs and interests. This is for every young middle years learner that we want to see. It also means that we're helping them develop their understanding of their own learning strengths and developing their capacity to communicate not just what they need, but what they need. My favorite would be the grade 8 student who saw me this year, who I saw last year in grade 7 and said, "Mr. Schneller, you know I don't do it that way. I need a chance to draw it." That's what I'm looking for. I want to move from teachers differentiating to kids saying, here's what I can do, here's what I need. If that's the learning outcome, if that's the intention, here's my way to do it, Schnelly. I love it when they call me Schnelly as well. So friends, colleagues, it's coming again, frolics. I've just made this little representation of an article I wrote a few years ago, just talking about how we've been working on kids being reflective and becoming aware over themselves. You might call that self-regulation and self-regulated learning. So now we've been connecting in our BC curriculum with this idea of 21st century learning, where we want kids to be able to adjust and say, what do I need and where am I going? Where we become more of a facilitator as educators, supporting kids to do that work and helping them to self-regulate their learning or self-direct their learning more. And that's a competency-based curriculum where we're moving towards developing our capacity. So today, or in this series, we're really attending to student voice. And to develop student voice, we need opportunities for kids to wonder or create or try things out, to try open-ended things, and to engage in deeper learning that fosters their sense of, I can make a difference. Look what I made. Hey, let me show you what I did, which moves us away from, I'm doing what you did, to here's what I created, and sharing with each other. And so we really want our kids, our learners, to be co-creators and change makers and citizens. And so we're excited that you've joined us for this series this year. And Melissa and Janice, I just can't wait to hear for your examples in section 2 and section 3 of our time together today. All right, so I talked about student voice and really helping move away from kids being marginalized in our schools to kids being more centered in our schools. This aligns directly with the first people's principles of learning. We recognize that all children bring gifts. All children have strengths. And maybe you've already done this fall, but you've already made a wall that says something like, here's what my superpower is. Here's what my gifts are. So we as a collective know what we each bring. When we take up Indigenous perspectives in our classrooms, we're also inviting kids to reflect on who they are and share who they are and what's working. We're always looking for this notion of you're always growing, you're mastering things, and we're here to support you. We're here to mentor you and develop those capacities. What that also means of us is that we need to create spaces of belonging, right? Communities of learners where we feel connected. And Janice and Melissa will talk a little bit about that in their next section. So friends, I'm going to say it again, colleagues, one last time, frolics, there are practices that lend themselves to student voice or nurturing student voice. And so I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about open-ended tasks and teaching is in the opening, and then Melissa and Janice will pick up on this in their section, but then Nikki and Shaheen will take this up again in the next session around numeracy and math, and then Vicky and I will be back with you, perhaps with Joanne, in the final session to think about this even more deeply in literacy. So Tammy and I, look at Tammy and I pinned right here together. Tammy and I have been doing some work together for, a couple decades or more together, really working with mentors of ours, Susan Close, Faye Brownlee, Linda Wingren, Doug Buell, who have really worked hard to encourage us to engage in practice in our classrooms that always start with connecting, where kids get to think about, what do I know about this already? What could this look like? What are we focusing on? This might involve sharing a learning intention, but it's always starting with students. What do you think about this? What do you know about this? What do you wonder about this? When we start from students, we welcome their funds of knowledge, and we ourselves can direct our teaching better because we see what students are bringing. It's like formative assessment to start your lesson, everybody. In a processing phase, we're modeling, we're mentoring, we're supporting kids to construct meaning. Remember, Tammy used to call it like chunking the text. We chunk the learning so that we support students to develop their skills with some support or some mastery. But we always want to get to some place, especially with the student voice lens, where kids can connect ideas together, connect their own knowledge with the new knowledge to say, here's what I think now. So here's one of my favorites, everybody. It takes almost no prep. You're welcome. I think it might even be Survivor Week. So this one's called 4 words. So what you do ahead of time as a teacher is you pick 4 key words from the lesson, from the learning, from the text, whatever you're doing, and you have kids put one of each of the words in each corner of a Post-it or a piece of paper. And in the middle of their Post-it or the piece of paper, they have to show how those words connect together. They can't just draw lines, people. They have to put words on the lines or draw a picture or a sketch or write a sentence. But what that does is it creates a schema to learn from. What can I do with these words? How do I think they go together? And that sets the stage for the learning. We've already kind of preloaded some key vocabulary. My French immersion colleagues, this is a beautiful strategy, right? To preload the key vocabulary to work from. But everything is actually learning in context. And so we're supporting kids. So here's my example. Organisms, interactions, food chains, and ecosystems. Probably 2 of those words students are already familiar with, something we've already been learning about, and 2 are new words. And so they connect them together and they're guessing. They're making their best guess using their knowledge and their ideas. Beautiful little strategy. And then here's one of my favorites. If you don't have much time, let's just say you taught a lesson and you have 4 minutes left and you thought you'd have 20 minutes left. I end my lesson or my sequence or my week by saying to students, what were some big ideas from today? What are the things you're taking away? What are 2 things you did really well today that you're proud of? And what's one thing that you could work on? That's an example of personalizing or transforming and personalizing, where students get to decide what was important, think about themselves, and talk about what they want to work on next. All right, friends, that was the opening. I hope you're feeling excited. I am now going to send us into breakout rooms. And for about 8 minutes, you're just going to have a chance to share with colleagues about this exciting question mysteriously in my slides that I will find just now. There it is. Yes. Give me a wave if you can see that slide, Tammy. Great. So with some colleagues in a breakout room, what are some things that you do to welcome the diverse funds of knowledge that your students bring? What are some things that you do that welcome them in? What are some connecting activities? What are some things that you do that help students feel seen, known, or share their ideas that in an open-ended way, where in our classrooms, we're not looking for the right answer, we're looking for the thinking of the students. I'll see you in 8 minutes. Have a good chat. So folks, colleagues, thank you for doing that first chunk with me, which is kind of like laying the foundation. The potential of middle years kids is significant. But if we don't foster their voice, nurture their learning, give them some control and ways to share their learning in ways that where they have some control, we won't help them grow to their potential. And so I'm really delighted that my colleagues, Melissa and Janice, were able to join us today. And so they're going to share some of the practices that they use in their context, all surrounded with an SEL framework. So Janice and Melissa, I'm going to pass the torch over to the 2 of you. And thank you for joining us from Syilx territory today.
So this is Melissa and I, and thank you so much for having us today. We've watched some of your series and we know that we're truly honored to to be asked to be part of this. And we really hope that the time you share with us is you feel is well spent and we have something to offer. This is my colleague and dear friend, Melissa Burdock, who teaches French immersion at KBR Middle School in Penticton. And she's not allowed to touch the tech. So she tried.
No more.
And I'm reeling her back in. So because she's really excited to share. So and I'm Janice Mose, and I work as a learning support teacher here at KBR Middle School. And the two of us found each other and a couple years ago, and we've just really worked hard to work on our practices to engage all learners and work on thinking classrooms. So that foster student agency and student voice. So we're really excited to share that with you today. And I also wanted to say we live and work on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Okanagan Syilx people. And here's a beautiful photo of the two of us. We're at the Skaha Bluffs here, and we're taking a course actually to help us learn how to take our kids out on the land safely. And this is part of our work that we've been working on over the last couple of years on about how we can decolonize our practice. And part of that is to take our students out on the land and teaching them about the people that have been stewards of this land for so long. So this is our first step of learning how to do that safely. And we have a picture of that to share, and we're very fortunate for that. And we are going to continue to work on that this year, continue to work with knowledge keepers and learn more about the land that we live on and share that with our students. So that is us.
And we wanted to start with a welcoming ritual for our time together. And Leighton, I think you set this up so beautifully with your prompt. This is an excerpt from Stand Tall by Cleo Wade. The tree never feels less like a tree because it is different from the others in the forest. So why would we ever think we are meant to all be the same? To be unique is to be a living thing. And this is from Liberate Ed, created from a dear friend and mentor, Miriam Miller. If you don't follow Liberate Ed, I would highly recommend that you do. They have some beautiful posts. And so in the chat, if you could just pop either one or answer both questions. What is something unique about yourself that makes you stand tall? And what is one way you make space for all your students' unique gifts in your classroom? And we'll give you a minute or two to share in the chat. So Leighton, we can't actually see the chat in presenter mode. So maybe you can let us know when some folks have had the chance to share. If you want to share anything with us, you can, and then we'll move on in maybe 2 minutes.
Great, they're just starting to show up. Emma says, I try to honor the gifts and values of each student. The other Emma says, I'm unique because I'm me. There's only one of me. I love learning and love getting into nature.
Oh.
Some guy named Leighton says, I get energy from other people. Socializing lifts me up. And Nadine says, building community through shared stories.
Oh.
Thank you. And so we wanted to start with a welcoming ritual to begin a community through connection and belonging. This is one of the 3 SEL signature practices, and our hope is to model this strategy throughout this presentation as a framework for embedding social and emotional learning into everyday teaching practices. And so we've just included the link for those of you that might not be familiar with the 3 signature practices playbook, and you can find it on CASEL's website. And so for our Janice and I, when we try to plan our lessons, we really try to use this framework with our students. We start with a welcoming ritual, we have our engaging strategies, and then we end with an optimistic closure, which is how we're hoping to end our time together today. And Janice and I have been collaborating for a number of years, as she mentioned. Honoring student voice is a really important part of our practice. And what we wanted to do was just share some specific things that we've been trying together at our middle school. And we just have some specific examples that we'll go through.
So we've been working and thinking about how we might decolonize our practice. And one of the ways that was introduced to us was from Anona Campi. And she took the First Peoples Principles of Learning and she localized it for us and shared it with us about 2 years ago. And we looked at it and just really were taken back by how beautiful it was and how we could really embed these in a local way. So she connects all of the First Peoples principles to Syilx principles of learning and pedagogy. And as we played with these and used them in our classroom. We refer to them often, and we really think about them when we're planning our units for the students in our class, and think about where does this connect, and maybe what doesn't connect, and where we might make changes. So I don't know if everyone has had a chance or has had any when do their first People's Principles locally. However, you might think about this when you are teaching. So we just wanted to give you a chance, and it's sort of a curiosity is, how do you connect to local First People's Principles of learning in your own work? What might that look like as you engage in learning experiences and support your students? If anyone has any examples of things that they might do that they might have to offer somebody else.
Maybe Leighton, you can navigate the chat for us again. That would be wonderful.
Indeed, I can. And I know that people, just like you shared, are saying what maybe the potential is, or how they've already made maybe a local connection to local knowledge and the First People's Principles of learning. I know that something that's been powerful for us has been learning about Inalchanwich. How the Silch knowledge system really comes for understanding that ideas are complex and need to be engaged with over and over. And instead of in Western ways where we speed through things, we've learned that Inalchanwich is about a process of re-engaging with stories and knowledge over and over, as we will learn different things as we need them, as we come back to them. And that's like big idea teaching. Scott says, we share our local enhancement agreement with all staff. Tammy says, using the First People's Principles of learning as a lens for lesson design. H. Hunter says, connecting the First People's Principles of learning to core competencies and trying our hardest to include local knowledge holders and involve them in our learning. Lee Roberts says, learning about our place and how it connects to the local land. And Emma Mullings says, I use the FPPL as a framework to guide my lessons. Last year, we used these as the foundation to decolonize math by trying to be true to these principles.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those in the
chat.
One
more. And Jeanette says, I have an elder come into my classroom to teach us a new word from our local language. And I also have elders connect with our science lessons.
Beautiful. Thank you. As part of our commitment to truth and reconciliation, we also start our year by sharing the local creation story, which in Okanagan Silks is referred to as Chapteek and in Silchin. So we invite our Indigenous cultural advisor in, or our Indigenous support worker, to share the story with the class. And sometimes if that, we might also read it ourselves. So this is one way to welcome the local knowledge through story and through pedagogy. And it also allows the students to start to make their own meaning from the story, which is different than our traditional stories, or than stories we teach in classrooms. The goal of this is the students start to make their own meaning. What teachings live in the story for you at this moment in this of your life? And that was some teachings that was shared with Anona Campy, who shared this story with us. As you may hear it today, and there's one teaching that lives in there for you. And then later on a different day, another teaching lives in there. So that drop by drop, hear it over and over and over again, and see how that changes for you. So some of the important teachings that we hope the students come away with when we read this story that live in middle school years are: everyone has unique gifts, everyone's voice has value, everyone matters and has an important role in our community. So we do start our year with that and kind of anchor our teaching and use the teachings from that story throughout our year. And this is one of a couple stories that are in this trilogy.
And so the local First People's Principles of learning inform the way that I think, plan, and approach my teaching. And the very first local principle is, when we plan for anything, we consider the self, the family, the community, the land, as well as the elders, youth, men, and women. And this is how we build community together. Like the Silks creation story, the 4 food chiefs, everyone has a voice in our classroom. And our classroom charter is one of the first things that we do to start our year as a decolonizing practice. There are no rules in our class. Our charter is based on how we want to feel when we're together in our shared space. Students engage in emotional literacy activities to build their emotional vocabulary, and then we have rich discussions about the importance of each word that is collaboratively chosen. So This takes, and I've shared, the one that I've shared here is from last year, because this takes probably about 2 months of discussion and coming up with the words that are important to us and why we feel that they are important. And there's some debate, some respectful debate, because students have different ideas of what they would like to include and how they want to feel in the classroom. But the building of the charter, that's where the big learning is having those discussions and building our emotional literacy vocabulary. So the one on the left is my class charter from last year that we did together. And so the image that they chose, the kids choose something different every year, and I always love seeing what they create. And they based it on the word accepted. So they felt that it was really important that everyone knew that they were accepted and that they belonged in our classroom. And that's what their image represented. And then on the right, last year we built a charter for our whole school. So this is our KBR school charter. We had all 530 students plus staff put their voice and input into this charter. And we now have a common language in our school when we talk to one another. We don't talk about rules. We don't say no running in the hall. We use our charter and we talk about how we want to feel when we're at school. So that's what we've been working on as a school community, is our charter, our school charter together. And once we have built our positive classroom culture through the class charter, we began to dig into identity work. So this aligns with local principle number 8. Coyote teaches us what not to do by trying to fly like eagle. Be proud of who you are. And that's Coyote is a trickster in Okanagan Chapteek, and he sometimes tries to be like other people. And so really what he teaches us is that we need to be proud of who we are and our strengths and our gifts. And so each student takes the time to draw themselves as they see themselves in the mirror. First, they add their identity markers around their learning map and identity map, and then they add their strengths and stretches. So if you look at the images, their strengths are with the thick arrows. So the thick arrows are anything that they feel proud of, that they feel that they're good at, that they love. And then their stretches are with the thin arrows. And those are things that they feel like I'm still working on, or this is really hard for me. Once we're done, we sit together in circle and we lay the learning maps out like a rainbow. And so this shows, I may say something different every time, like show me on this side of the rainbow to the other how you feel about karaoke and singing in front of people. And you'll have the group that are at this end all the way to please never ever make me do that. And then I'll say something else. How do you feel about going up in front of the class and solving a math problem? And then they shuffle their papers, and then we have another rainbow with different people at this end and different people at please don't ever choose me to do that. And so I give a lot of scenarios so that the kids can see that they all fit somewhere on the rainbow and they all fit a different spot depending on their unique gifts. It also gives them the opportunity to see what the kids around them, what their strengths are. So when we do things together, we can really build on those strengths. We can partner based on our strengths. If I said this was hard for me, but you said, I got this, maybe I'll go with you as a partnership, a positive partnership. And throughout the year, we refer to these maps all year. We add to them. We talk about growth. We talk about our thick arrows and our thin arrows, and maybe our thin arrows, they start to get a little bit thicker as we grow. And so we add to these all year. We refer to them all year. They're on our wall. Students are very comfortable. We talk about if they're okay with having them publicly on our wall, and they are, which is really nice that they feel safe in our space to do that. And another example that I'm going to give is the name story. So a local practice that we bring into our classroom is the Okanagan Talking Circle. And my class had the opportunity to do one this morning. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit too. But protocol says that the first round of the talking circle starts with the sharing of your name. So it isn't just what is your name, it's who is your name. And so who is your name is telling the community where you came from. And it's inviting your ancestors to join you in circle and bring you strength while you share. And this was shared with us by cultural advisors Anona Campi and Sienna Gabriel. So every time we see them, they introduce themselves by calling on their ancestors, by saying who their name is. And so we do that as well when we start our talking circles together. We read different stories. Once we've had our talking circle, we read different stories to illustrate different aspects of name stories, including a local story, how names were given. and a spoken word poem by Idris Goodwin. And then these are just some student examples. So who is your name and sharing our name stories. So I teach French, so that middle picture, it says Sois fier de qui tu es. So that's that protocol, that local teaching, but it is in French. And I try to have it as visible as much as possible so that we can also see the local First Peoples principles in our classroom. So after we read some different books, we have our talking circle, we talk about our names, we talk to our families. Students then write their own name story. They share the meaning of their name and also who their name is so that they can bring their ancestors forward into our classroom space. Part of our group discussion is also around heart families. There's a piece of this that can be hard for some students, and we have to keep that in mind as well. So we really make sure to include what a heart family is, and that a family doesn't necessarily mean a biological family. So we hope to create a safe space where students understand that it's those that are in your heart and those that love you and that you love that you would call forward to bring into our classroom space. And I did include a specific example from a student that was adopted from Vietnam. And she told the story of being born in a different place, but she also told the story of her heart family. And so she calls on the ancestors that are from her adopted family when she's in our classroom. But we just want to make sure that we're including the stories of all learners when we are doing activities like this, because sometimes it can be really tough. And so we have our next breakout. This is a visible thinking routine that we thought we'd try today, but we also wanted to give you something that maybe you could try in your classroom. So this helps students make connections between new ideas and prior knowledge. And it is Connect Extend. It's actually Connect Extend Challenge, but we've made it just Connect and Extend for today. Our hope is that in your breakout group, you could have one person record maybe a theme or two or an idea or two to share in the chat when we get back. Sure. Okay, so the connect is how do the ideas and practices shared connect to what you already know or do? And we would love to hear about what you do in your own classroom. And then the extend are what are some new ideas that nudged your thinking or that might nudge your practice?
So we're going to head into breakout rooms for an exciting 8 minutes. Feel the excitement, everyone. When I say 8, you might have figured out I mean 10, but if I tell you 8, you just feel like you get the gift of 2 minutes at the end. And we will pop the questions in the chat box as well, or you can just take a picture with your camera. But how do these practices connect with what you already know or do? Or how might this nudge you forward in terms of what's happening in your classroom spaces? We'll see you in 8 minutes. Have a great chat. So friends, thank you for embracing your colleagues and sharing. I know it's like, that's part of what we are, folks. Janice and Melissa and Tammy and I were just talking at the break. This is how we do middle years, folks. We collaborate with each other because we mentor a group of kids in everything. And so we need each other to come up with ideas. Speaking of which, we invite you in the chat right now just to share something that came up in your conversation. Either something you're trying or something you're thinking to try, something that welcomes kids, funds of knowledge, their identities, helps build classroom community. Whatever you'd like to share in the chat box, we will accept with love and appreciation.
Yes, we'd love to hear what you talked about. We wish we could have been in all the breakout groups.
It could be something you're planning to do. But knowing this crowd who's in the house right now, there's a lot of good things that are happening. Sarah talks about the ruler approach to SEL. Lee talks about building culture and community through lessons and circles with SEL and mindfulness. Kathy learned about the anchors of emotional intelligence and how cool that is. Leanne from How to Go I learned about self-reflection, or she engages in self-reflection for everyone involved in the learning process. Emma talks about posters that students make, having artwork in the classroom, and then building community norms together. And I think she must have been talking to Rose because Rose would have talked about hexagonal thinking. Oh. And Emma Mullings talks about Monique Gray Smith's building resilience through 4 blankets of identity. Terry talked about land-based learning with forests right outside their door. And Laura's team talked about connection to the 4 blankets by Monique Grace Smith as well. Thank you, colleagues, for sharing in the chat box. And we have some beautiful final examples from Janice and Melissa. There's always a little singing on these calls, folks.
Oh, there we go. So connecting back, thank you for sharing, and connecting back to our building our classroom culture that fosters joy, student voice, and agency, and literacy and numeracy. In middle years, I just said to Melissa, let's look at some photos. What's in our photos, and that we could share that might have something to offer middle years learners that connect to the local First Peoples principles. So on the left there, we have this just was last week. Sienna Gabriel is singing the Okanagan song with Melissa's class here, sharing some local stories that are connected to taking care of the land. She's introducing protocols. She's talking about who is your name. So that's an example of ways where we're bringing in student voice and agency and involving local knowledge. The one right beside that is some students in Pam Rutten's class, who teaches grade 6 here, and I'm co-teaching with her, and the students are dramatizing the coyote and eagle story to deepen their meaning around what that story would mean to them. And here they are dramatizing, and the other students are watching. The one beside that is a final task, a transform task Melissa did with her students, working on math and circle. So they built, it looks like a curling, what did they build, a game?
They had to build tabletop games that the other students could play. So this group, it was really cool. They built a curling rink that's also a hockey, what's that, foosball game. And it was, you could play it, and it was so fun. It was a huge hit.
So that's like learning takes patience and time, and there's a drip, drip, drip. When in our local First Peoples, can you help me with that word, Leighton? You said it's enough. Yes, thank you. Drop by drop, little, takes time to work on this math and have a final task. And the other 2 examples here are 2 examples, teachers taking their students to learn on the land with Anona Campy and Dustin Hyde, our Vice Principal of Indigenous Culture. And at the top there is Sydney Cartwright. This is us harvesting sage. Actually, during the heat dome, this was the hottest day of the year, and this poor teacher is pregnant, and Anona was so gracious, and she had a tent set up for us and was spraying us with water, and we took the kids out in the land to harvest sage. And at the bottom, that's Pam Rutten harvesting buckbrush as part of our science unit on mixtures, taking the students out in the land and teaching them how to harvest buckbrush, so to make tea. So these are some examples of taking kids out on the land and honoring their voice and bringing in some local knowledge.
And then the next thing, so after in our classroom, we cultivate that safe space. We ensure that students have the chance to think about who they are, their identity, what their strengths are, and what makes them unique. We start with reading, and we start with developing a reading identity. So this is what we are doing right now. This is all stuff that we've done in the past 2 weeks. And so we start with who you are as a reader. So having kids, and because I teach French immersion, there's that added layer of who are you as a reader, but in your second language, and sometimes third and fourth language, which can be really, really tough because I teach late immersion. So this is only their second year of French. So trying to figure out who are you as a reader in French. And once we start to think about that, who am I? What do I love to read? What's hard for me? We co-constructed our reading rights together. So the bottom picture is the lesson that we did together. And this is based on the work of Pernille Ripp. So the students on one side said everything that they loved about reading in class at school, and everything that made them hate reading. So when you make me do projects after I read a book that I just wanted to read for fun, I hate that. But I love when I get to be comfortable when I'm reading, or I get to choose where I sit. So they told me all the things they loved, all the things they didn't like, and they came up with their reading rights. So their reading rights are on the left, and that's from this year's class. And so we really took the time to talk about What do they need for their reading experiences, for their personal reading? What do they need from me and from each other? And that's that we came up with our reading rights. So no, I am not allowed to give them homework about what they read, their personal reading. That is for them. One thing that I love that they said was, we don't want to have to talk about our books, but Madame, if we want to talk about our books, you need to let us. So they want the freedom to be able to say, this is where we're at now, and either we do or we don't want to talk about them, and that's okay. What we're doing right now, today actually, we just started reading conferences. So I do this with our librarian, and we meet with the students one-on-one to talk about who they are as readers in French and to talk about ways that their community can support them. So what can I do as your teacher to support you in your reading journey? Today, quite a few kids said, I'm not really sure how to choose a good book in French. So now I know that this is my next step. How do we choose good books in French? A few students said, I need time to read. Can you please make sure that we have time every single day, and maybe a little bit more time than you're giving us right now? Yes, I can do that. And we also came up with our goals. So they made long-term goals for the end of the year where they'd like to be with their reading journey in French, and then also in the next 6 weeks. So what are we going to focus on right now? And my hope, my plan, after we develop our reading identities, we've got those going, we'll work on our writing identity, but right now we're really focusing in on who we are as readers. And next, thinking about math and creating a culture where all students are empowered. So at middle school, we start with play. We start with joy in math. And so these are some pictures of students in the classroom, and this is this year as well, of them playing during math. So we use manipulatives, we play games. They're also engaged in the physicality of learning. So it's more than just cognitive with math, it's the physicality piece too. We do a lot of non-permanent vertical surfaces to ensure holistic engagement during math. So that picture in the middle, it's actually, those boys are on a ledge and they're standing up on the window and they're doing some problems on the window together. But that's their favorite spot to go. If they want to be really engaged in a problem, they want to stand and they want to write on the window, and somehow that empowers them to really dig deep into the problems. And then Janice and I both just did this. She did this with Pam Retton's class, but we also talk about student voice and agency in numeracy so that all students can see themselves as capable mathematicians. So we really specifically use that word. We are all mathematicians. My students were shocked when I told them that. They were like, am I a mathematician? So we really bring that language that we are all mathematicians. And we build a thinking classroom by having students brainstorm what mathematicians do when engaged in problem solving. So these are two of our examples. And we add to this, we refer to it, we reflect on it as we engage in math in our classrooms.
So Leighton talked about this at the beginning, and we're going to show an example. So one way we can plan for our learners is through design. And when we look at our lessons, we look at them through backwards design and a UDL UDL lens, Universal Design for Learning lens, as we design our lessons. And we look, beautiful connection here, Leighton. You just got me all ready for this slide. So we looked at, when we design our lessons, we look at how are we connecting students to what they already know? How do we activate prior knowledge? How do we begin to bring in new knowledge? How are we going to engage our learners? And how do we honor everyone's funds of knowledge is our first piece that we're starting to think about. Who are our learners and how are we going to engage them and connect to what they know? Then we have the processing phase where students are making meaning, and we're, like you say, Leighton said, we're guiding them. And we're also watching very carefully, are they making meaning? Are they struggling? Do we have to need supports? Are we looking for extensions? And that's where classroom teachers and learning support teachers are working side by side and collaborating and doing that work together, and bringing in other people if that's needed as well. They're processing new ideas, they're clarifying understandings, they're working together. And then we have the transform at the end, where students are transforming their learning and personalize their learning and reflecting on their learning. What was hard for them, what worked well, what might they do differently, talking about the strengths and some things that might have been harder for them. So we're going to show you an example of what that could look like. And so I'm not going to tell you what the math task is, but I'm going to see if you can guess, because this is what we make the kids do, or we have the kids do. So for this task that we're going to introduce to the students, and the students are doing this right now, we went around and snapped pictures today as Melissa and I were preparing. We start with word work for this task in math task. So this is where does literacy live in math? And we're working with Tammy Kay, who's our literacy helping teacher, teaching us different ways we can introduce word work. So word work begins to connect students to the math. It starts to teach them the vocabulary that they may already know and some that they may not know. So pre-teaching to vocabulary ensures that the students have the background knowledge that they need to be successful. And sometimes we notice that when they start the math, we realize it's actually the vocab that's getting them stuck and not so much the math. So this is a way to make sure students understand and create their own meaning together. And right now they're doing this through play. They're doing something called Teams Games Tournament, which is so much fun. So they're learning this together collaboratively through play and making their own meaning of these words. And then once they do that, the next connect we do is something called partner picture talk, which some of you may be familiar with. And so partner picture talk, in this partner picture talk, the students have done their math vocab. They have a pretty good understanding of the vocab that's going to be in the task. And we show them each picture individually, and they talk as in partners about the image and find the math vocab that lives in that image. And while they examine the images, they're sharing, they're thinking together, they're with the goal of using their math vocabulary. Then they get together in the group and share it out. And as they're sharing the images, Pam and I are documenting that on the image and making sure that their thinking is visible and all funds of knowledge is honored. So as we do this, the ability for us to include all learners is available. So that's this one. And then we have them guess what the task is, which is building a haunted mansion. So their next task is the processing piece, where they need to start to think about where might the math that they've learned live in a haunted mansion. So to start off with, we give them this thinking sheet, and they find and label the math that lives in the image by connecting to the word work. And then they create their own image of the vocabulary that's found. So they start to make their own meaning, they start to build their own images and really develop a solid understanding of the math that they're going to be engaging in. Do we have time to do this, Leighton?
You bet you do.
Do we do? So I gave you just a little tiny bit, but this is what we do with the students. So I want you to think about a couple of the words that might live in this image for you. And I want you to share what math lives in this image, and just pop that in the chat box. Any you can share there, Leighton?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Of course.
Okay.
Parallel lines, symmetry, acute angles. That was mine. Shapes and ideas, perspective, symmetry and asymmetry, rectangles and rectangles, geometric shapes, perpendicular. Come on, people. Come on.
Like we're teachers.
Yes.
Parallel lines.
Yes.
Pythagoras, perpendicular, parallel lines, 90-degree angles.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
that's anything else there, Leighton, or?
You got it.
I'm good. So that's their next task, is using this thinking sheet and really processing the ideas and the understanding. And this is where you'll see classroom teachers going around, checking for understanding, kids working together if they need to. And again, we're looking to see, is there anything more scaffolding that we need? And then this was today. So they have their sheets. And as you can see in the on the left there, that's Pam working with this group, checking in on them. Are they clarifying their understanding, seeing where their thinking is going? And the pictures here are their first drafts. So when we talk about students working together and then coming and working as a group, they work in groups of 3. So their first draft is their own ideas, like what might they draw, and then they get together in a group of 3 and they choose the best ideas collaboratively. And it's so interesting because they start talking about the math together. Oh, I see you've done this. I see you have a right angle. And so together they're co-creating and making this meeting, and then beginning to choose their best ideas that they're going to use to build their haunted mansions. And here they are in the ideating and making phase. So this is done in partnership with our tech ed teacher, Devin Burrows. So they're starting to take their drafts, they're generating potential ideas, they're working with others to gain ideas, they're looking at criteria, they're figuring out what the idea they're going to pursue, what tools and materials they need. They're making a plan, they're coming back to it, and we're checking in on them to see, do they need additional support or how are things going? And lots of student voice, lots of student choice in this activity collaboration and making meaning together. And then these are not quite done. So these are from last year. We have a final celebration of learning where they make their own, where they collectively make a haunted house, but share their thinking and are assessed individually orally. So this is a unit I just want to make sure to mention. This is Pam Rutten and Tammy Kay have worked on this unit collaboratively together. So just wanted to share that, and here's some examples of some finished haunted mansions. And I just added, math curriculum that lives in this project. This is from grade 6. So the big ideas there that we talked about, teaching to the big idea versus just content. And then the competencies that live in this project are pretty much everyone. And of course the core competencies also that exist in this. And the joy, they have so much fun when they do this. So that's some work that we're doing in math. So did you?
So yeah, I think that is the end of what we were planning on sharing. Thank you so much for letting us be here, and thank you, Leighton, for inviting us.
Would you like to see one more math example, everybody?
Please.
Okay, here it comes. And then we'll do our closing whip around. I have one last example. I think you have to unshare maybe, Janice.
Okay.
I'd also like to share that never are we exactly on time. This has been magnificent. You have laid down the future sessions, folks. Here it comes. So this example comes from 2 colleagues that I worked with over time in Vernon. So Scott, right in your wheelhouse. And can you see that? Great. So here's an example of math in inquiry learning that builds directly from what Janice was talking about. So this was us using math for social justice. So applied, just like Janice was talking about. And we looked at the curriculum and we had a multi-age classroom. So for grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9, we found the concept that was in parallel. So we're in proportional thinking, everybody, relationships. And we also identified the big math ideas. So just like Janice, we made those explicit for kids. Here's what we're working on. Here's what we're doing. And their challenge was to find a social issue or an epidemic or a natural disaster that agitates them. And so they defined maybe something that they hoped would not happen again. They had to figure out who they're going to work with. They had to work with 1 or 2 others, maybe even 3 others, but they couldn't just work with the same people. So they had to say, who am I working with, and how are there some new people in my group that I haven't worked with? And then here were the things that they had to consider. They had to find numerical data, which describes the impact of this particular incident. And they'd try to find more than one source. To make sense of the numerical data using charts and graphs and percents, they had to work back and forth, just like in Janice and Pam's example, between different math concepts. So fractions, ratios, and percents. And then they had to create solutions or suggestions to minimize impact in the future. So just that idea of application. And then they had to present what they learned to the United Nations of Vernon Community School. So they had to present what they learned. And so just like in Janice and Pam's example, where they made haunted houses for other students to give feedback on and comment on, in the same way, when you make something and you have to communicate your mathematical ideas, then you have to consider it more because you have an audience in mind. And so we just offered them some questions that they should consider as they worked on their projects. And so how many people were affected, or what kind of data could you collect, or did things change over time? Maybe winter, there was more disease and less disease in summer. And then they tried to gather as many things as possible because it's hard to know what you might need. And then we did along the way, of course, teach the math And along the way, we also made sure that before you went to the next step, you could show us the different kinds of thinking in percents, in decimals, in fractions, and in graphing. But it really moves us away from, like in the haunted house example, and this example, we're applying the math to something, we're creating things, and there's a chance for students to both have choice, but also to have voice. And so they're creating a haunted house, they're solving a problem, and it's really this opportunity to make math a thing that we figure out, that we create with, and we communicate with. Oh, I snuck it right in there, Janice. That example I didn't get in the first round, I got it in the second round.
Thank you.
So we're going back to the optimistic close now, friends. So we're switching out. Look at me and Janice in our tech sharing. Amazing. I'm feeling optimistic about the optimistic closer.
Me too. Oh, nope. How's that, Leighton?
That's beautiful.
Great.
So thank you to Janice and Melissa for coming and sharing and collaborating and stepping outside their comfort zones to do this work. But the richness of your practice, colleagues, really speaks to also the humility you have, where you're learning and trying and figuring out together and with your kids. Thank you for honoring the colleagues that you've worked with over the course of the last little while, including Corey and Miriam and Pam. And we invite you now in the chat box to offer a word that really sums up your learning for today. What's one word that you have that summarizes your learning for today? And normally we do this as a waterfall, but I think we can do it as a drip by drip in honor of simple ways of knowing. So here's what we have in the chat box. We have inspired, inspirational, inspiring, my goodness, connecting, refreshed, collaboration, engaging, fun, fantastically inspirational, listening, fun, and one more. Somebody give me one more to close off. It's coming. I feel it. Fun. Oh, we got more fantastically. We got energized and hopeful. Colleagues, the recording of today's session will be sent out in about a week. Just depends on how long it takes to edit it. Tammy, Janice, Melissa, and I maybe talked a little bit over the break that we're gonna have to cut out while you're in breakout rooms. In the next session, we're with Shaheen and Musani and Nikki Lineham. And so they're going to share more mathematics. It's a math focused section next time. So thinking math classrooms, what can this look like to foster voice, to support kids developing their agency, and to really deepen mathematical thinking and learning. And then the final session, we'll be joined by Vicki Roberts and perhaps Joanne Calder, and we'll look at literacy and nurturing literacy in our middle years classrooms. Thank you so much for joining us. We deeply appreciate not just your attendance, but your collaborating in small groups so that we've made a network, not just in this session, but across the province of folks that you can connect to, feel inspired with, and offer ideas to. Have a wonderful October. I can't believe it's mid-October. And have a wonderful evening, folks. Take good care.